International Youth Voluntary Service Award is about joint activity and action, about cooperation, about mutual learning, about reciprocity. It is what its name stands for. It is Ubuntu. It is that we are in this world together, and that the difficulties that Europe is facing and that Africa is facing are not actually that different.
So the application form is composed by one part to fill in by the hosting organization, and another part with a statement from the volunteer to have a more comprehensive view of their experience and their work as international volunteers abroad.
The award ceremony takes place tomorrow, as you well know, but we'll also be sending detailed letters of feedback to all of the applicants with a view to supporting them in their work. The partnership has produced 2 videos so far, maybe 3, we'll see. These will all be available to be viewed from the website. We're also producing a guide to international youth voluntary service with the input of all partners and all of the jury members to help disseminate the learning that we've made through this project.
I must say, we learned a lot from the German volunteers in that as young as they are, they were 19 and 20 when they arrived, but when they left after a year, they had grown up so quickly. At the same time, they were an asset to us because we could rely on them to do quite a lot of things. I can recall one incident where our executive officer, Mrs. Matape, would ask for some data, and I would give it to this one German volunteer, and in no time it was done. You know, that German precision on time, or even before the time. And it's one of the skills or things that has stuck with us to the extent that I'm still accustomed to, you know, whatever I need, I would just say Janine or Simon, but they're not there anymore. And I expect the same of my team now. There have been some sticky issues with the arrival of the volunteers, but in general it's been a good experience, and these young people have left with quite a number of skills that they've gained through the organization. I'll give you a few examples: facilitation skills, to be able to facilitate life skills programs to participants, being trained in the various life skills programs that we have. Also how to mobilize your community to be able to run your own HIV/AIDS prevention campaign, how to put an event together, just a few of the skills that they've been trained in.
In one of the projects that was done by the volunteers early this year was they looked at the community, they identified the need for that community, and then they decided that they construct a piggery, which they did, and they also bought some pigs for that piggery, and it was handed over to the community for the mothers who were looking after the orphans. So it was some kind of income generating activity for this community, and they benefited to us. That is some kind of contributing to development. Not only that, but through that building of the piggery, the young people also gained enormous skills, because when building, they were building alongside professional builders, so they gained that skill, and also just mobilizing the community, and also mobilizing some funds from within the community where they were operating. So it was really good, and there are many other projects that young people do get involved with, like looking after the orphans, teaching, doing some crafts, and all range of activities. There are so many that really the community benefits from, because it's two-way. The volunteers have got something to put on the table, and also they have got something to share or to get from that table. That's why we believe in mutual cooperation, mutual exchange, so that we all benefit, and that's the essence of international volunteering.
I think it's critical that in the environment of international volunteering or any form of volunteering, that there is the element of exchange, that the young person involved in volunteering is giving as much as they are receiving, and that they are learning from the local community and sharing their skills as well as taking skills back home with them. As far as the elements that make for a great, a good international program around development, I think it's important that referring to the cycle that Lyndon presented earlier, that partners recognize that all volunteers who are coming into a country or leaving a country doesn't necessarily possess skills. So it's important that when partners are seeking placement within projects and activities, that the level of ability of volunteers is honestly assessed and recognized. As you mentioned the example earlier of East London. It can be very disconcerting for a volunteer to be placed in a position of feeling unable to manage a task, and equally disappointing for a host community or organization who had those high expectations. Because often those participants who are coming in on volunteerism activities are paying a huge amount of money for the experience, and often not feeling fulfilled in that experience. They are also not necessarily part of that cycle of development and support, of being nurtured and supported and mentored and growing through a process. So while that is beneficial often to an organization or to a project in a small way, it doesn't necessarily have long-term developmental effects.
You can see that there is an unprecedented expansion of international volunteer services. And I think the challenge that is there now is to manage that expansion. I think you can agree with me that the background of voluntary services is encompassed within missionary services and some sort of post-war reconstruction. And that in itself has given a different face or a different perception on what voluntary services is. And that perception is again encompassed in issues of elitism, issues of imperialism, something that does not entail equalness. And in that way, if we are expansion with that mentality, then we are doomed to fail, or we are doomed not to experience anything. And I think as a result of which it would be the same voluntarism that Terina has been talking about. So I think we need some of the critical factors to consider is the need to develop international voluntary services on an equal platform. What sort of skills are we learning from each other? The mutual cooperation that we've talked about, the decision making, what is each other's role in the process of decision making. Everybody must have a say in the process, because the challenge that we have, it appears people or nations that have the financial muscle tend to impose on what they would want to do in the communities or hosting countries they are visiting. And that is at the expense of the value and the priorities of the communities that these volunteers are going. So that equalness in the whole preparation process, the decision making, must be ensured. The other process, we also need to understand that the process of volunteerism is at a time that the volunteer is supposed to adapt to culture and adjust from his own doing, from where he's coming from, to a society. And that process of adapting and adjusting could be one of those critical factors that we would consider that would make voluntary services, international voluntary services, a success.
In all our programs, we are both in, let's say, Zambia and in Sweden, so the mutuality is really there. Let's say if we would have a cooperation with South Africa, the South African participants would also spend 3 months in Sweden, together with a Swedish counterpart. And we believe that that gives so much to the participants, both for the Swedes and for the, in this case, Southern Africans. You bring back so many new perspectives, because you've been living with a person that has been questioning his own life, his own country as well. So it gives a new dimension to the experience of volunteering. That's just one example of how you can run mutual volunteering projects.
We need to see clearly that the international voluntary service story is not necessarily for our benefit in the developing world in the primary instance, but in the primary instance is becoming a way of making those countries strong within a changing global environment. And one of the features of the global environment is that it is moving from a dependence on industrial economic work development to knowledge economies. Okay. And if they're in a knowledge economy, knowledge and experiential learning becomes an important part of how you equip your citizenry with the skills for your country to become competitive.
What do Europeans do with development education?
Great question.
And because so much around this from the sending organizations is about development education. We heard about the government of Germany sending 10,000 young Germans.
Well, they're not there yet.
Right, to expose themselves to development issues, and we would assume that at some point there would be some benefits to that. What are those benefits? And particularly from a developing country point of view, I mean, we're faced with huge issues here on this continent.
The Swedish government, at least, are giving money for development education. One of the reasons, there are, I would say, 3 reasons. One of the reasons is that to obtain a willingness among the Swedish population to pay tax for development. Because if the population doesn't want this, then it's politically difficult, right?
I think development education helps young people that haven't seen the world yet to have an open mind, and to start to understand things. These young people will become citizens. They will vote. They will express their mind. They will maybe be active citizens. They will do something, and this is a lot about making the whole society aware. Because when you live in a small city in the countryside, wherever, you are not aware what is happening in the world. And I know it's not enough, and it's not going to solve maybe anything, but maybe it's something to raise the awareness. And those people are going to vote.
Okay, so it influences citizenship behavior.
What the role of possible future trade is in all of this? You know, trade, yeah. Possible future trade with African countries. The extent to which voluntarism is a process of preparing citizens of the European countries for possibly working in whatever, you know, you were mentioning profit, but you didn't go into the detail of it, in making a profit out of business in Africa, anticipated whether it will happen or not. A critical thing for us, we sort of for South Africa, I feel that identity of young South Africans is a very important thing for them to feel and be proud of being young Africans. But that it also equally important in the process of shaping identity and belonging for young people to develop the international identity too, feel like citizens of the world, to help prepare for the leadership of the future.
I see also a huge responsibility for these young people. First, they are the ambassadors for the sending organizations. They have to represent the sending organization. then again they're serving as a role model within the different projects for the young people and support the work of these hosting organizations. And then when they come back to the individual countries, they're also like ambassadors for their host countries. They show the culture of this country. So they have a huge responsibilities on their shoulders, and we also shouldn't expect too much from these young people. I think the most important thing is to bridge the cultural gaps between each countries, and this is already a huge task for these young people.
Because I think being a volunteer is a learning process. It is, but I come there to learn, and hopefully I learn a lot. And while I learn, I can also, how should I say it?
Contribute.
Yeah, I can contribute.
And I think what's so important is what are the sending organizations or the hosting organizations telling the volunteer, and is it the same thing as the project is being told? Because the expectations can often be so different. And it's the responsibility of the projects to supply the hosting organizations with very clear job descriptions, very clear who's in charge of the volunteer training systems and so on, but there's definitely lots of help is needed. So
I think there's a real need for hosting organizations to actually undergo some orientation on how to manage the volunteers, because oftentimes what we experience is that the volunteer arrives with those task descriptions that have been sent to the volunteer before they even arrive. But when they come here, it's a different reality. The volunteer will have to come and sit. They are being utilized for things that they didn't come here for, like sitting as a receptionist. And oftentimes us as a sending organization, we ask ourselves, is this really value for money if we bring a volunteer from far away as Netherlands to come and sit as a receptionist, whereas we can get someone whom we can impart those reception, or they are in fact available in country. So I think there's a need for organizations to, I don't know how to manage the volunteers so that they can get the maximum out of the volunteer skill. Do we have the infrastructure for that hosting organization to know what is it, how do I manage this volunteer? Is there such a training or orientation on how to manage that volunteer as a hosting organization? What is it that the volunteer needs? How do I make them happy?
So what I noted was that these young volunteers have been sent to a specific country, and then what they have been assigned is totally what the host is expecting, and also is totally to what they have learned from college. So their contribution becomes very little, because they have all the knowledge, they have all the skills, but they cannot put them in practice because it's not what they have been sent to do. So I would say that to improve this volunteering for the young volunteers, whenever we are assigning them, let's try as much to see that whatever we are sending them to volunteer, have a relationship with what we have studied. They can be able to chip in what they are giving out, you know. And at the same time, of course, they lack the experience, but they will learn now. They give the knowledge, and this is how we are doing it. With what they know, they can mix together and come up with something which also the host will be happy, or the communities will be happy. This is one of what I said. And also, I learned that when the volunteer come in like that now, and because they have not to others, now they start to know, to see, what am I here to do? Am I here to learn? Is my host not teaching me? Because the host didn't know. Because the host thought that this is the one who is like a specialist, a consultant coming to assist. Then, prepare the host to know the exact situation, where he is to chip in. Second, this volunteer now is trying to do, as I do this, tomorrow I do that. In the end of the day, she has not done anything. But if she was guided, she could have come up with something. So we need to also, if we think that we cannot send helpers with specific knowledge or qualification which they have, then we need to make at least a specific training. I remember we had national volunteers. They were not doctors, they were nothing, but we wanted them to go and sensitize people about HIV/AIDS. What we did, we trained them for 2 weeks on everything about HIV, prevention and everything, how to approach
Because even entry point is a problem. When they went to the field, they did very well.
Something that has not been mentioned before, which is very important in our experience, is that there is a very strong mentor involved. A mentor who knows the culture of the volunteers as well as the hosting organizations, and who can help to prevent a lot of misunderstanding. And I think what we need from sending organizations is that they not only appreciate the role that a mentor plays, but also are maybe capable of compensating, and I mean financial compensation for the mentor for the work that he's doing. I think a mentor is even more important than specific job descriptions, because a mentor can solve so many problems as they appear.
Joint tool that has to be developed by both the sending and the hosting countries around measuring performance, and the whole question around job description. I think in that way we'll be able to address the gap that has been identified. Situation where volunteers come here and they're not sure what they need to do.
As an intermediary organization, as somebody who facilitates, a volunteer center facilitates best practice in volunteering to our member organizations, we offer volunteer management training courses that helps prepare organizations to receive volunteers. It helps them to develop task descriptions, helps them to develop those systems that makes it essential not only for international volunteers but also for local volunteers. Because in order for us to make an impact at the developmental level, we need to have systems and structures in place. And that is often the gap. We often think that volunteering, volunteers come in and everything's hunky-dory, and there's all sorts of issues at play in organizations that we don't take into account.
Because I just want to understand the process. Is it supply driven or is it demand driven? If it's demand driven, to align this according to the national priorities of the hosting country. In this country, one of our priorities is skills development. And therefore, I assume that you might actually need to get people who are very well skilled as volunteers, not only people who do charity work.
Previously, the sending organization would do the orientation without the hosting organization. And that created extensive problems for the hosting organization because these volunteers came in with certain expectations which the hosting organization could not meet. Subsequent to that, we've had lengthy interactions where we have now joint planning sessions, joint orientation sessions, joint mentoring sessions, and the point that was raised earlier on about the mentorship program was that we had to find suitable mentors for each of those volunteers that are coming into the country. The challenge is still the cultural side of things, in that the mentors are not exposed to European culture. They've heard of the country, but they don't know what the culture is all about. And that's where we're finding a bit of a challenge, in that we would like to match the young people with the right mentors, but the cultural side of things is always going to be a challenge.
Where in the community, if there is a volunteer placed there, and then when this volunteer leaves, when you are measuring the impact, you discover that when the community is not aware of this concept of volunteering, usually it becomes very difficult for a volunteer who comes, another volunteer who comes to really be welcomed by the community, because the community is not ready. They don't know exactly what this volunteer is coming to do in that area. So there is need that the community is well aware, so that whoever comes in that community, the community are able to manage that person. So my training that I was doing with the community, we were placing, we want to place new volunteers in the community that we have never worked the community that we have never worked with. So in order for us to make sure that the volunteers will be safe and will be welcome in that community, I went to that community to conduct a training how to manage volunteers in the area, and also to find out the needs of the community and what kind of skills they would want to get from the volunteer when that volunteer is placed in that area. So in doing that, we also take advantage to make sure that we convince the local authorities in that area so that they are aware of the project and to align our objective with their expectations. I think what is more cardinal for organization is also to try to develop the volunteer manual so that guides the organizations in their operations and how to manage volunteers. For example, when the sending organizations are doing orientation, the information that they give out to these volunteers who come to Africa, or the volunteers going to Europe, should be at least the same format. The information shouldn't differ so much, because if they give orientation and the information that the volunteers come with differ with what they find on the ground, it creates a lot of conflict and discomfort among the volunteers and the recipients. So it's important to align the orientation to make sure that you send the information to the sending organization about the community, about your country, so that whatever is given to these volunteers is not below what they are going to expect.
The reality is international volunteering right now in Africa is supply driven. It is not demand driven. The motivation of the European countries that is causing that supply to be driven. Okay. It is up to the receiving countries to get their act together and make the most of that experience and impact on the supply. Okay. Because otherwise we cannot make demand. Where is our volunteer infrastructure in this country? It does not exist. And I have to turn to the Department of Social Development, Muzi. This is right in your court. Okay? We have a national youth service. It has not made a widespread volunteer system work successfully. We've got to fix this thing, and we've got to fix it fast, because we are missing opportunities here. People are banging at the door to come and help. Okay. And I think we've seen some of the rich opportunities that are at our disposal. Let's do something to actually make that work. The expertise is in this room, both international players, Skillshare, AFS, VSO, you name them, and local expertise, Volunteer Center, Love Life, etc. I mean, there's amazing stuff happening here. Something from the European Voluntary Service as a regional initiative in our region. Let us send Nontokozo to Mozambique. She learned to speak Portuguese. And imagine what a difference it would make to her life. Even if she went for a month, or 6 months, or a year. Let us bring the Tanzanian to Angola. Let us send the person, Kagiso, from Botswana, into Evans's projects in Zambia. What will that do for regional stability and growth and mutual understanding? It will do a fortune, because the Europeans really are organized, and this is not only a big industry, but it is one with great potential. So thank you all for coming, and please join us for lunch. And Patrick, the Ubuntu team is continuing its work after lunch, but you'll have to return to the YDA, and we'll be in touch longer term. So thank you, and let's just have discussions over lunch about how we can work together to take this forward.